Now we move to a discussion of Afghanistan. Many of you may have heard the news that broke just in the past 24 hours that the government there has decided to suspend women's education at the university level. This comes after they previously restricted women from attending school after, I believe, the sixth grade. This has obviously caused great concern in Afghanistan and around the world, especially among Muslims who recognize how important education is for both men and women in our deen. So, with that, we want to discuss this issue with someone who can really bring an important perspective to it. Let's welcome our special guest, Hurunnessa Fariad, who is the Multi Faith Neighborhood Network Director of Outreach. And we're very happy to have her here today. Assalamu alaikum. How are you?
Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much. Glad to be here. I'm doing well.
First, tell us a bit about your background and your connection to Afghanistan. I think our viewers would be very interested in hearing that.
Thank you so much. So I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. My siblings and I had to flee when I was 2 years old when the Soviets invaded. And I was 2 years old at that time. And we fled into Pakistan for about a couple of years. We lived in Karachi. My mother, unfortunately, passed away in Karachi, but we managed to come to the United States as refugees in the early 80s, part of the first wave of Afghans to come after the Soviet invasion. I grew up in Queens, New York City, and then I moved to the Northern Virginia area in about around 2004. I'm currently on the board of Women for Afghan Women and on the board of LSSNCA, which is the largest resettlement agency here in the DMV area. And my main objective is to help the newly arrived Afghans here through the work of having accessibility to different benefits here through the resettlement agency, and then for Women for Afghan Women, working to help women here in the United States as well as women in Afghanistan.
Alhamdulillah. Well, thank you so much for your work, and may Allah grant the highest rank of paradise to your mother, who passed away when you all were in Pakistan. Let me ask you this. Have you managed to keep in touch with anyone in Afghanistan, family, friends, during these decades of war and occupation? Have you managed to keep in touch with anyone? And what's their reaction been to not only the end of the occupation, but also what the Taliban has been doing since they came back to power?
Absolutely. I still have cousins, aunts, uncles in Afghanistan, in Mazar Sharif, and in Kabul. And the number one thing that they've been going through is a lack of accessibility to resources and needing help, whether it's financially, especially the women in my family who have contacted me to get help. And at times I have raised money to send to them in the last couple of years. Cousins who want to go back to school and who need tuition money, and family members who are just struggling overall because they are either widowed or don't have a male in their family to go out and work. And on top of that, finding work is so difficult as it is in Afghanistan as a whole, that the struggle really comes down to a lot of these women having to do a lot of work outside the home and inside the home to feed their children.
So tell us, how have things changed? It sounds like we are saying it was a difficult situation even during the U.S. occupation there. What's the situation now? We know there's been a lot of concern about the central bank not having access to funds and that contributing to a humanitarian and economic crisis. And now you've got the government, the Taliban, who are imposing some rules that have caused incredible consternation, especially for women. What's the main concern right now on the ground now?
When a government does these types of things, the most vulnerable in the community is the one that's affected, and it's usually women and children. And that's been an obvious case going in Afghanistan. And we've seen this throughout the years in the media and stories, personal stories that Afghan women have told in the media and in their own stories and platforms across social media. And I think it's important for us to see that the women who are trying to uplift themselves from a country that has been in war for over 40 years. Even during the 20 years of so-called democracy that was in Afghanistan, there were still challenges for women, especially poor women or women who are in rural areas who could not have access to education, or there weren't any teachers in their provinces or villages. It was something that they had to really struggle with. And when you make women choose between their livelihood and their education, it puts them in a real big bind. And at times we see in Afghanistan that women have always had challenges. It's more evident in the last 40 years, whether it's not being able to go outside without a chaperone, whether they're now not being able to go to school in the universities. It's a constant struggle for women to have access to things that are part of their rights as Muslim women in the world. Unfortunately, when we have governments that are imposing these types of rules on women, it actually not just only affects those women and their family members, it affects that society as well from moving forward when you're comparing it to the rest of the world.
So let me ask you this. Are you familiar with what the Afghan government is saying about this suspension, what their explanation for this is? And from your perspective, as a Muslim woman, someone who has an amazing education and has contributed so much to our country and to Afghan women, how do you respond to what they're saying? Well, if you had a chance to sit down with the leadership of the Taliban, what would you say to them to try to get them to see how harmful what they're doing is?
Definitely. A lot of times when men are in power, the one thing they could do is suppress women is by cutting off their access to education and work and their movement up in society. And when you do that, it's an easier way of controlling women and using Islam as an excuse to move that idea forward. But we know that Islamically, women have just as much right to get an education as men do. Actually, it's something that's encouraged in our deen. And to say that women are supposed to just stay home and cook and clean and have babies is a direct insult to our faith. We see that throughout history how women have contributed, Muslim women have contributed in so many different areas of life. Without education, without having the access to be able to get into that field that they're having interest in, how are they going to move forward with the rest of the world? How are they going to be part of the movement that's creating cures for cancer or other areas of science, whether it's technology or even the environment? Everyone needs to be part of the learning process. And we've seen throughout history that when you limit the access of education to women, that society actually doesn't thrive at all, regardless of what the men are doing.
So, what do you think is the next step here? How do you think this issue will be resolved? There have been some, I think, protests in Afghanistan. Obviously, there's concern about what the reaction to that could be. Where do you see this going? What's your hope for how this will turn out ultimately?
I do hope that the government in Afghanistan changes its mind on this decision and sees that it's not to the benefit of the country, but actually to the demise of the country and the women that live in Afghanistan, understanding that um, allowing women to go to school helps them move Afghanistan forward from even the Islamic perspective as well. That when you suppress women and tell them to stay at home, what you're going to have is an uprise in protest, in violence, in spending time and energy in trying to quell that down. But what we could actually do is actually use that time and energy to allow women to go to school, to uplift Afghanistan, to catch up with the rest of the world. I mean, 40 years of war, we're already behind. And now we're put in a position where we're not even moving forward to catch up. We're actually moving backwards.
So, here in the United States, what are things that you think our government should be doing to help the people of Afghanistan, as well as people who recently come here, whether that's the central bank funds release or anything else? What do you think our government should be doing?
I think the American government owes the Afghan people in many respects. Here in the United States, we were supposed to have the Afghan Adjustment Act passed, but unfortunately, it was not included in the bill to be passed. Just in this last couple of days. And that is a very disappointing in our community because we were hoping that the Afghans who came to the United States last August, a year and a half ago, would have an easier way of applying for green card instead of waiting to be accepted as asylees in this country. But that did not go forward. And for a country who brought all these Afghans here, it would have been the most logical and easiest way to get this issue resolved instead of having people waste so much money and time and energy trying to find lawyers and attorneys who can fill out these forms and take such a process that's so long and intricate, and at times a lot of people might not even be qualified for asylum. And what's going to happen to them? Are they going to be sent back? This would have been the easiest way to get Afghans who are already here a more legal status here in the United States, and getting them the green card that they, I think, deserve for coming into the United States and escaping what they felt was a threat to their life and to their families' lives. In Afghanistan, we have to make sure that we're constantly keeping Afghanistan in the forefront of our elected officials here in the United States. You can't just bring a group of Afghans here and then forget about the rest that are over there, the ones who are suffering. You see videos of little children begging on the street, the mothers on another side of the town begging for money, the brothers on the other side. These kids are supposed to be in school. These kids deserve an education just like everybody else. But for some reason, when it comes to Afghanistan, the world is blind, deaf, and dumb. And we just turn our cheeks and say, well, we bought this many here in the United States and some in other European countries and some other countries around the world, but that's not enough. Afghanistan actually played a pivotal role in making sure that the Soviet communists were not taking over countries in that area with the help of the United States. But the United States, I feel like, does need to do more in making sure that they live with dignity and pride.
Absolutely, it's a very sad situation, disturbing situation, humanitarian crisis, an economic crisis, and then now you add on top of that the plight of women in school. So may Allah guide the people of Afghanistan to thrive and succeed by properly upholding Islamic values at every level. And may Allah guide us to be of assistance to all oppressed people around the world, no matter who's doing the oppressing. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it and appreciate your work. And we hope to have you back soon to get more updates about the situation, hopefully positive updates. Inshallah.
Inshallah. I pray that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.